Yeah, she big. This might be an issue fitting this in the engine bay. No. Jeez. Hey guys, welcome back to Reignited and our twin charge Magnum project. Now, in our last episode you saw I was working on the intake manifold here, and I was working on these intake manifold plenum plates. Now I finished these things up, used a file to get them all ready to go. They still need some additional modifications, some sizing modifications, but in this episode we're hopefully going to make a big step forward on our intake manifold fabrication. Now in advance, I want to thank you guys for your patience with this. Of course, I do work a full-time job, so I only have a limited amount of time to work on this stuff. So don't feel like I'm dragging this out or anything like that. I'm working as quickly as I can, but this fabrication stuff is what takes the most time. So that being said, let's get into it. All right, a bit of a battle later. We have our runners welded to our intake plenum sides there. Now these aren't actually welded to the intake plates on the bottom because there's going to be a very tough access to welding down there. I'm going to cut these plates a little bit towards the end here because they're a little bit longer than they need to be. But welding that bottom section is going to be very tough, so we need to retain access to them as long as possible. But overall, you can see we've got our runners set up. Now what we have to do is we're going to go ahead and have to actually build the plenum itself, and that actually should be a little bit easier. This is very time consuming doing all these runners here, but hopefully the box itself will be a little bit simpler. Welding this top plate onto the plenum is going to be the very last thing that I do, well, except for actually drilling for the fuel rail holes and putting in some fuel injector bungs. But right now, let's get started on the plenum. All right, we're gonna get back to that intake manifold build here very shortly, but I did want to show you guys some of the new parts that came in for the build. Now, a couple of the things I was still waiting on to get for this build was the turbocharger, a wastegate, and a blow-off valve. So I was looking for a company that really had what I was looking for, but had it at an affordable price, but wasn't on the kind of bottom tier where you had to worry about quality and stuff like that. So one of the companies I was gravitating towards was VS Racing. It seemed like kind of a lower middle ground for that sort of thing. So I contacted them to see if they would be willing to partner with me on this build, and they said no. Their marketing budget was already allocated, whatever the reason was, they said no. So, but I still like their products and I still decided to give them a try. So I went ahead and just bought all this stuff myself anyway. So, hey, I'll be able to give you an honest review of these things as far as do they actually perform or not. Let's go ahead and unbox these things and take a look at them. Ooh, she's fancy. So this is the VS Racing 50mm blow-off valve. Comes with the weld-on flange for the aluminum, which is really nice. You can get that welded in. Wow. Okay, this wastegate is much larger physically than I had anticipated it being. That's interesting. Could make packaging a bit of an issue here. This thing is pretty big though. This thing is huge. I wanted to make sure I went with a good sized one, that way I wouldn't have any issues with boost creep. And I apparently have done that. This thing is gigantic. All right, if the wastegate is that big, I'm a little bit concerned about how big this turbo is going to be. Let's take a look. Yeah, she big. This might be This might be an issue fitting this in the engine bay. Holy cow, the outlet. It's gigantic. Oh, jeez. Holy cow. I don't think I was expecting it to be that size quite so big. Interesting. So let's talk just briefly about what we've got here. We have our 50mm blow-off valve right here. We have our 50mm wastegate, and we have our 75mm turbocharger with a billet wheel on it. This thing actually looks really darn good. Now, when choosing a turbocharger for your setup, you really want to take your time with this and make sure that you get the right setup. That way it's correctly sized for your combination. Now, when I did the research for this, I kind of went really in depth and I waited at least 15 minutes before I pulled the trigger on this one. I'll be honest, I don't really know all that much about turbocharger sizing. I probably should have taken a little bit more time with it, but my combination is going to be a little bit different because I do have that root supercharger on there. So even though the engine is a 5.7 liter, it's going to act like a much larger engine. So I will say that I went on the slightly larger side with my turbocharger sizing because I thought it might work. Who knows? I could be absolutely wrong. I'm not sure. The real issue here is that in my head, I didn't quite correlate the physical dimensions with this thing with the actual size that it was going to be. So I have major concerns about actually fitting this thing into the engine bay. Major concerns, but that is a road to cross at a different time. For now, let's get back to our intake manifold. Okay, my apologies. I was kind of a bad YouTuber yesterday and I didn't film this section where I was cutting out the plenum box itself and starting to weld this thing together. I'm very happy with how this is coming together. Let's go ahead and continue on with building the box portion of it. Now, the one issue I'm running into here is that when you're fabricating stuff like this, you kind of have to decide what to weld when, because some stuff is very difficult to access after you've welded everything else. So one of those that I'm looking at right now, the hardest part of this whole build is going to be welding this inside edge of these runners here. Now I'm going to cut part of this flange off here to give me some more room in here, but it's still going to be fairly tight to get a torch up in there to actually weld that. Now I could do it right now with the box being unbuilt, but then I wouldn't be able to access the outside of the box either to weld that. So I think what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and weld the box up first and then cut these flanges, weld these runners to the flange, and then try to get that inside edge. If worse comes to worse and I can't actually fit a torch in there, I'm gonna have to weld these runners on the inside, which I'd really rather not do because I'm concerned about affecting the actual sealing gasket surface area there. So let's hope that everything goes according to plan. But for right now, let's continue with building the plenum area itself. Okay, we got most of our plenum pieces all cut out and ready to go. So now it's just a matter of tacking these things in place and then go ahead and once they're all tacked into place, then we can start welding this thing up solid. Now again, we're just doing the plenum portion right now. We'll work on the actual intake plates and the upper top plate for the supercharger at a different time. Now this section I actually really enjoyed because working with the plate aluminum, all you have to do is kind of clean up the edges and then weld, and all the welds generally came out a lot better than most of the other ones did because these are some of the easiest type of welds you can do. Like this one in particular, I have really good positioning here. There's no obstruction to actually getting in there. It's just one of the easier welds you're going to do. So I was actually really happy with how this one came out in the end. Now, same story with just building the rest of the box plenum right now. And in this case, all I'm doing is I'm just tacking all the corners and get everything tacked into place before I weld it up fully. I was absolutely paranoid this entire time that I was going to warp this thing with all of the heat that I was putting in it. So I was really trying hard not to put too much heat into any one area of it. So as you can see here, just actually putting some more tacks on the plenum itself because this stuff does like to move quite a bit. So you want to have tacks every few inches or so just to make sure that everything's going to stay right where you want it to. All right, so we've got it all tacked up, and when it's on its backside like this, it kind of reminds me of like a bug. Like you kill a bug and it's got its legs sticking up into the air. This bug is dead. I don't know, something about it just made me laugh. Now on the inside here, my plan is to go ahead and put stitch welds all along these inside seams just to give it a little bit of extra strength after I weld the outside edge. And of course, I had to at least put the supercharger on there to get a visual of what this thing's going to look like. Again, that's the sort of thing that gives you the motivation to continue. I am pouring time into this thing, so I need these little moments like this just to see what it's actually going to look like. And there you have it right there. That is as far as we've made it so far. I'm super excited to get back onto this in the next episode and make even more progress. This intake manifold is actually really coming together. The process has been just as stressful as I anticipated it being, but I have to say I'm really excited with the result. I hope you guys are as well. With that being said, we're gonna see you guys next time on Reignited.